my guest today is Marie Dollé, who is one of the most brilliant thinkers I know. We met on Twitter, where she writes a lot about digital trends and the future of social media. She also publishes a weekly newsletter in two languages. The English version is called In Bed with Social, and the French one is In Bed with Tech. In fact, her newsletter is so good that I actually thought it was her full-time job the first time we spoke, and I embarrassed myself when she kindly told me that her full-time job is actually at a public investment bank in France, where she helps connect startups and investors. So all in all, she's like this superwoman who gets a lot of things done, inspires a lot of people, and it's so great to have her on the show. Marie, welcome.
Hi, Dhru. Thank you for inviting me. I'm very happy to be here.
I am super excited. So why don't we go down our first rabbit hole? I have a question for you. What does inspiration mean to you?
So that's actually a really good question. Inspiration to me is my fuel. It's basically what energizes me. It's like really what drives me, why, it's something really important and basically what moves me forward in everything I do. I guess what defines me is that I'm an over curious person. It's not just curious, like over curious. And basically my life is moving from one obsession to another one. And there's this quote I really like from this Brazilian writer. So I hope I'm not mispronouncing his name, but he's called Paulo Coelho. Yeah. And that quote always resonates in my head because he said something like, just when I thought I had all the answers, all the questions change. So I think there you go. Welcome to my life.
That's so cool. He is an amazing author and actually a really inspiring author. I think one of the first blogs I ever read was his personal blog into his writing process, and it's just this little corner on the internet that I don't think a lot of people know about, but it's really beautiful. So that really resonates with me actually, because I find that inspiration, it's something that actually somehow unlocks a lot of energy, right? Even though you've not necessarily done anything, biological to unlock the energy. It's not as if like you've been for a run or you've actually eaten more food or got more sleep. You've just been exposed to, let's say, some sort of new perspective or stimulus, and your entire system is like on overdrive. And that fascinates me. It feels as though that's just like, how is that even possible?
Yeah, I mean, completely. I really like that word. I mean, energy. So basically inspiration is energizing someone. And I think it's also linked to like people's personalities. So for some people, inspiration is much more important than others. And, one question that comes often is, like what kind of inspires you, or, and I think that my perspective on this is that just basically everything and anyone can inspire you. It's just a way at looking at things. And so that's the way I guess I take it as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I find that, a lot of people are a little bit cynical about words like inspiration. They're like, scratching their sort of chins at it, like, what does that actually mean? And, in the real world, is it really that important? But I feel it has a lot of really, really practical and important consequences, right? For example, something I've been thinking a lot about is in the workforce, right? If people are inspired, they just have more energy, they are more productive, they are more creative. And we see this in startups all the time. How can a tiny team of like 5 or 6 or 10 people take on these massive companies, right? They don't have the same level of resource, same level of technical sophistication, not even the same level of skill. And yet they're tapping into this invisible energy source that they seem uniquely able to do, and larger companies can't. So I feel as though you're right. There's definitely some sort of like energy transfer taking place. And that doesn't just make you feel good, but actually has a lot of tangible, outcomes. So it's really important. It's awesome to hear that inspirations and, it matters to you. I love how you describe yourself as like an over curious person moving from one obsession to another. But I'm sure in your life, there have been many moments where perhaps you're not feeling inspired, right? Or drained. So I'm curious, what do you do when you're not when you're uninspired, and how do you navigate that?
So that's also a really good question. I think that since it's very important for me and it's my driver, I think that when I'm uninspired, first of all, that means that something's wrong with myself, or at least there's a reason behind it. So I think the first step is understanding what's the reason and trying to find the solution. Because if I'm tired, then I need to rest. If I'm stuck on something, then maybe I should ask someone, to help me out. But I think that 90% of the time when I'm not inspired is because I'm drained. And I think that's something that's like common with people that are very curious, is that I think we're always on kind of thing. And as I grow older, I've been like really focusing on understanding how I work, what soothes me, what, brings me balance. Because this idea of like you can be your worst enemy, and I
Yeah.
think that's great. And I mean, it's great to know it, because it's great to be like an inspired person and be inspired by a lot of things, but then you can drain yourself, and I think that's like number one, my issue. So just as John Lennon said, there are no problems, only solutions. So just basically just figuring out what is the problem, because sometimes it can also be, you're working on something and you don't believe in it. It can be a project, so talking about large corporations, for instance. So again, I come back to this idea of like having different perspectives on things. So I'm someone who pays a lot of attention to details, and like kind of my life mantra is, if you look where everyone looks, then you'll find what everyone finds. So I always try to, like, when there's something I'm not inspired or I feel drained, I'm gonna just cut what I'm doing and go for a walk or do something completely different. Because again, inspiration is like, it's really linked to creativity and everything. And I think that you need time and space, and that's something very important. It's like at sometimes you really need to shut off and do something else. And that's also something, for instance, like writing. I've noticed that, before I would like stay on a piece, and if I felt stuck, I would just like, insist. And I think that's not good. You have to at some point do something else, and then you come back and you're not stuck, and you feel better about it, and you see things differently. So yeah, I think time and space is something very important when you're, uninspired.
Wow, that's such a beautiful answer, and I really love that perspective as well. That oftentimes when we're uninspired, or our creative tank is empty, or we're hitting a wall, as you said with your writing, our instinct is that we have to break through this, right? Like, this is unacceptable. This is like, there's something fundamentally going wrong here, and we have to do whatever it takes to like break through. When actually, perhaps the lack of inspiration, it's a signal, right? It's a signal that what you require is change, and that can come in a micro and a macro context. And a micro context could be, look, Marie, you just need some sleep, right? Stop writing, go and sleep, figure this out tomorrow. In a more macro context, and I'm sure this is not the case with you, but for many others, it may be like, there's a reason you're not inspired. You're not necessarily doing your life's work, right? You're not pursuing your curiosities. You're not discovering your passions. You're not going down enough of the right kind of rabbit holes. And that's actually, that's a beautiful thought. Maybe
I
there's
think I'm
nothing. Yeah, no, go ahead, please.
sorry. I think I'm lucky enough because I sleep very little. So basically, I have my full-time job, but I have a lot of time to like go into my rabbit holes and everything. So I don't feel any frustration.
That's great, and you're lucky. You're really lucky. I'm not sure many people could say that. But I want to tug on that a little bit. So you mentioned that you actively look for rabbit holes, and I know this just from following you on Twitter as well. Like, you're almost very aggressive about the rabbit holes that you go down, right? Like, you're actively looking for them. You don't just sort of rely on like stumbling on something on a nice sunny day going for a walk. You're almost on the hunt. So I'm curious, like, if you could talk about how conscious are you when inspiration strikes you, and do you actually actively look for it? Like, do do you really almost go on a mission to get inspired and look for new perspectives, or do you often find that actually it just reveals itself at pretty unexpected times? I'm curious, like, what's your process like?
I think it's actually both of them. Like, I tend to think that it's conscience, but in reality, I think that, 90% is unconscious.
Yeah.
Because when you think about it, you've got, you're reading something, then you stumble across something during your day and everything. And all of those are like unconscious, and, you think, it's not important, and then it goes in your brain. And then at some point, like, it's sometimes you don't see things, and then at one point you start noticing something, and then you remind yourself that you saw it 3 4 times, and that's when your brain makes the relation. And I remember listening to this fascinating podcast of this graphic. It's a very famous and prolific graphic designer that's called Paula Scher. So I don't know if you've seen it, or I mean, listened to it, but I really like the way she puts it. She says that, our mind is like a giant slot machine. So on one side of our brain, we have all our, like, everything we feed our brain. So our experiences, what we read, what we encounter, what we, everything, from our day to day. And, even feelings and emotions and way things make us feel like, and, just it's just rolling in there all the time. Okay. And then on the other side is what we input is like the specific brief. So the constraints and needs of a particular situation. And then that's when, everything gets kind of mixed up, and then, something comes out. But I think, and that's why I think it's interesting, is that you never know how good what's going to come out of it.
Yeah.
And that's something I find fascinating, because there's no framework today that would say, okay, the more you're inspired, the better, your work will be, or something like that. That it's not possible. So this kind of like, the thing that you don't know how it's going to come out is actually something interesting. And I've noticed that sometimes I spend, like, 20 hours on an article. It's not my best article. And then
Yeah.
sometimes, and so that's actually something fascinating. It's kind of obsessing me, because I like finding frameworks or explaining things, or, being able to, like, replicate things. But, that's, I think no one has the answer. So I like that idea of slot machine. So what I try to do is basically I try to feed my brain with, like, what I find is interesting or good stuff. And then, I think, you have different processes then to, get that information and learn it and everything. And then that's when the outcome comes. But, it's a fascinating question. Don't have the answer, but I like that, slot machine thing.
That's really cool, and I love what you said about just feeding your brain, right? And I'd love to hear more about how you have fed your brain over time, and generally your informational or inspirational diet, right? Because it sounds like today you have a lot of command over your processes, right? You have this newsletter, you have influence online, you're following the right sort of people and signals on Twitter and so many other places. But I'm sure once upon a time that wasn't the case, right? So I'm just curious about how has that inspirational diet, for lack of a better, metaphor, evolved over time.
I think that, probably the basic ingredient, as I said, was like curiosity, like a deep curiosity. And then I was lucky enough to work for 10 years in a media research institute. So I worked across 3 divisions, which is consumer insight, understanding what consumers want and what they're looking for. Media monitoring, so basically all the tools to monitor media and curate information. And then advertising intelligence, so understand, expenditures on advertising, and also analyzing advertising creatives. And all of, that big vision really gave me, I think, deep understanding of, like, the media ecosystem and the sheens of information and things like that. So I think that was basically a big like game changer for me. And then regarding like my diet, like my media diet, or like how do I process information, is I believe that there are two important things. So I read a lot. I don't know, I think I read like maybe 3 or 4 hours per day. I read a lot. Um, I tend to read less books now, but a lot of articles, a lot of newsletters. And I think that to excel in like today's like ever like changing landscape, what is important is to have a focused reading and then diagonal reading. So let me explain. I'd say like 20 or 30 media sources, which are people that I admire, that I believe are, amongst the best thinkers out there. And I will like religiously read them, and deep reading, and, sometimes even read it like 6, 7, 8 times, it's like, wow, very interested about that. And then I have a Feedly. So Feedly is an RSS feed, and I'm gonna put in it any like media source I find interesting. So it can be on just any topics. I add that. Then I have boards and classifications. So it can be in French, and can be in Spanish, and can be in English, and can be in Italian. I really believe that the cultural gap is something very important, because spotting things in one country can then be reused in another. So for my newsletters, I like putting French examples in the English newsletter, or putting English examples in the French newsletter, because that's what gives me an edge compared to like people that write in English and that are American. So that's something I need to leverage. And when I do my diagonal reading, because on Feedly I have I think, I don't know, 300, 400, maybe 1,000 sources. I have to count. I really don't know. But basically, each week, I go through, between 2,000 or 3,000 sources. So you're going to ask me, like, how do you read 3,000 articles? That's not possible. So it's not, I don't, but I diagonal read. And I've gotten so good at it that, with the title and with reading like quickly the article, I can spot if it's worth reading in depth or not, and I can spot interesting information, and I spot patterns. So that's really interesting, because when I've swifted through like all those articles, it takes me 2 hours, like twice a week, approximately. And then the most interesting part when I do that is then afterwards I sit down, I have this blank document, and I just put down anything that, I found interesting. It can be a word, it can be a sentence, it can be the name of a journalist, it can be anything. But the idea is not really to like write down an essay or something, but just something that, called my attention. And that, at the end, I have maybe 20, 30, 40 examples. And then that's when I start digging, because for some reason it caught my attention. And my idea is, even if I don't understand why it caught my attention, my assumption is that my brain made an unconscious, connection that I'm not aware of, but that is worth digging, So let me give you like one concrete example. That's something that happened not so long ago. It was, I think, in March or something like that. I see that, there was these influencers, it's like, articles in, it was like maybe TechCrunch or something like that. So I see 2 articles, mentioning that influencers are carrying out lotteries, so giving away money during pandemic. It was like during the first episode of COVID. And for some reason, I don't know, I find that interesting. I'm like, interesting. And then 2, 3, so I sort it down, because when I find something interesting, but like doesn't make sense at that point, but I find interesting, I have a way of categorizing that information that, just says, it's like highlighting something triggers, but I don't know what, and I put it aside. And then I put some keywords so that I can find it easily afterwards. And 2, 3 weeks later, I see this article from this New York Times journalist that, starts talking about lottery. And I'm like, second time, And then a month later, or 2 months later, I hear that, Snapchat is launching a lottery, for creators. And then I'm like, okay, there's something there, so I need to start digging. And so then I started going in, Sensor Tower and, App Annie, and looking at apps in, everything that's, related to lotteries and everything. and then started digging, to the why. And it's actually pretty interesting. It's related to history. Like, when you have pandemics and things like that, people tend to gamble more, and so basically, and I thought, that was really interesting, noticing that people would play more and everything. And so that was a shift, and a trend. And I thought that was, interesting. And see, that's something you spotted, which, like, just one article could make you think, well, it's weird, but and then second, and so that's what all the time happens now when I do my media monitoring that way. When I consume information, that's how I spot trends. So weirdness, I wrote a piece on, like, the weird at scale, and I can't count the number of things I've seen like weird. And again, I saw it one article, two article, and then you notice it once and then you see it everywhere. It's like there's a BS, it's called, I can't remember the name, but anyways, you see it everywhere. And so that drives kind of inspiration. And when I go on that Feedly, I never come out of like 2 hours of session without something to dig in. So that's interesting. And I think one other thing I find very interesting too is that when I find an article or something, my obsession is always going for the source, looking at the
Right.
source, so who's the author, who is the author following. And so I map, an audience on Twitter, on LinkedIn, or whatever. And then I dig, and until I'm tired.
Wow, there's so much to unpack there. That's pretty incredible. One thing that struck me as just fascinating from what you've just said is how, like, the process seems so instinct driven, right? Like, you've curated your sources and then you're just trusting your instinct, right? Like, whatever pops out at you. And it's not necessarily, as you said, a complete idea or like a thesis or even half a hypothesis. It may just be a word, right? Or a journalist name, or like the word like lottery. And you're like, let me put that in a document. And I'm just gonna let that sit and almost like just sit on it for some time.
Yeah.
Let it brew. And then maybe in a few weeks' time or a month or whenever it is, something else will catch your attention and you'll synthesize those two dots and you'll draw a line between them. So I'm not sure what point I'm making here, but I just want to like kind of shine a light on how interesting that is as a process. Because on the one hand, it's clear that you're a very systematic and organized thinker. But at the same time, you trust yourself, right? You're trusting yourself to find just to spot something on a page that may or may not lead to something else. And it's both like equally committal and non-committal. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like, okay, you're not going to necessarily like bet the farm and bet the next 20 hours of work that, okay, this is the piece, but you're willing to invest a little bit of time and energy and maybe even love into it. And yeah, I just find that balance of like, systematic, but also like a little crazy, creative, chaotic thinking interesting.
I think it's both completely.
Right.
And something I noticed too is that the more active you are, the more opportunities it brings in. So like this morning, for instance, I was recording a podcast with someone that's actually a reader of my newsletter. And while talking to him, it actually gave me idea for 2 articles,
Right.
So and I think the more you're active and the more, it brings opportunities. And I think that's the same for creativity and inspiration, is the more you read, the more, you do things, then the more it brings, in. And that's really phenomenal, I think.
So I guess what you're saying, it's like there is no real magic formula for getting to the right idea, right? Or getting to exactly the right piece of inspiration. But there is definitely a formula for creating the conditions where inspiration will just appear in a manner and in a way that you can like naturally synthesize it. So for you, you talk about this concept of diagonal reading. That's something that works for you. For other people, it may be just, let's say, curating a lot of visual boards on Pinterest, right? And just like connecting dots between them or coming up with random doodles or scribbles based on them. So yeah, it's like something, as you said, it requires an active investment. It's not like this divine intervention, this like metaphorical lightning bolt that will just like, come down from the sky. I mean, it can, but first you've got to arrange the sky, right? Like you've got
Exactly.
to. That's amazing. That's brilliant. I feel listening to you, there's so many things that I just want to try out. Like, so I don't know if you've ever read about the process of speed reading, or you learned how to speed read, but I haven't, but I do remember reading like a few articles about it. And I think the way that people speed read, they don't read from like sort of left to right, they read like diagonally, right? So you don't like sub-vocalize and process every word. You don't read with your mind, you read, or your voice, you read with your eyes. And then you just trust your mind that it will pick up the words and the context that are required, and it will just filter and erase out everything that is noise and is irrelevant to you. So yeah, that was just that was something that came to mind when you were talking about that, which I want to after our call I'm going to explore that more. So I'm very, in fact, no, before this, tell me something. Have you always been like this? Right? In terms of your process of thinking, like when you were in school and growing up and studying, is this something that like you've naturally been really good at, or is it something that you've like consciously worked at over time? Just your process of synthesizing information, because you definitely seem to have a sixth sense for like what is next, right? It sounds like the way that you're talking about it, it feels like really rational. If you make it sound like, cool, anyone can do that, right? But clearly anyone can't. So yeah, how has it been for you?
I think I've always been like that. I've
Right.
always kind of been the kind of like the weirdo person, you know. I and the thing is, I thought that first that people were kind of like me, and then I realized that people were not. And this the way like when I talk to some people, they say like you're gonna buy, for instance, a computer. If you buy a computer, it's like quite an investment. So you're gonna
Yeah.
take your time and maybe ask for advice and check one or two articles or something like that. So that idea, well, I do it for everything. Okay, everything I come across. So I'll give you just an example. I was at the hotel, so it's random, so it's not related to tech, for instance. And I think that's also something important for inspiration, because
Mm.
inspiration isn't always where you think it is. And that's why I think that being a generalist or being curious about everything is something very, very important. Because so I'll give you this example. I'm at this beautiful hotel in Italy last week, and I find that the towels are really soft. Okay, so someone just, I guess, a bit normal would think, oh, they're good towels. Maybe I'll ask. And so there I am getting my this obsession about the towels. And so I go and check with the hotel guys and say, what kind of towels is that? And so they're like, okay, so it's this like finest cotton, Egyptian cotton. And I'm like, oh, Egyptian cotton, why Egyptian cotton? So they kind of give me an answer, but I feel that they don't really know. So then I went digging on internet and to understand. And then I read that this thing about, Egyptian cotton. I mean, obviously it can be marketing, because now, they can tell you it's Egyptian, but, it's maybe not even from Egypt. But anyways, you see that there's the Nile, and, that cotton, it's handpicked there. And so the cotton isn't stressed out and everything. And so I'm starting, I spent 3 hours on the internet, researching on Egyptian cotton. And so my husband's there asking me, what are you doing? And I'm like, I'm looking Egyptian cotton. And so then afterwards, the next step, I think a normal person would say, okay, so good. And maybe I'll buy some. So there I'm researching all the cotton Egyptian, and I realized that there's this question around threads. So like the more threads you have, like, I think 600 is pretty good. The softer your towel is. And so, again, someone probably would stop there. And then I'm not only buying it, but also considering, is it also a way to wash them? And so there I heard that bicarbonate sodium, if you put it, when you wash it, it keeps the towel soft. So, I went probably from, okay, these towels are soft, to like, this is how I'm going to be washing now my towels and everything. And so that, it can, it can make you smile, but basically that's my life for everything, for tomatoes, for strawberries, for, and I think that that deep curiosity is the way I'm constantly like inspired by everything, so I think it's really related to like personality. Most people maybe sometimes feel uninspired, but really, I mean, I'm inspired by everything. The only time I'm not inspired really is, again, when I'm drained, when I'm really tired, I need a break. That's basically the time, but I mean, I'm sure you're like that, how your brain is always on, always, and it's like in the middle of the night you wake up and then you remind yourself or something, and it's like, it never stops. And I think I've always been like that.
That is brilliant. This really resonates actually, because I feel like um, inspiration it's a choice, and it's all around us, and there's also like a lot of magic in the mundane, right? So for me, I get a lot of just inspiration from fiction, and I love to like write fiction as well. And some of my favorite like writers, um, they write about the most like seemingly mundane, boring, everyday things. And yet they write them in such like, they really bring them to life, right? They really, really write them in such a way that just, they add this kind of magical lens to everything. So when you were chatting, I was suddenly reminded of this book I read like years ago called Stoner by John Williams. And it's a novel about like a boy who lived on a farm and had like a generally unremarkable life, right? There was nothing like quote unquote remarkable about his life. Like he lived on a farm, he decided to go to university, he studied English, um, and he sort of just went through the motions of life all the day, and the entire book is till the day he dies. And nothing notable happens, and yet it's absolutely captivating, right? It's absolutely captivating. Every single incident, it just really inspired me and like charged me. And I feel like I really believe that every single thing in the world, whether it's as simple as something like a tree falling down in a wood, or let's say, a towel in a hotel, if you look at that through the right lens, there's a lot of wonder and a lot of like mystery and magic there. But you have to be willing to look, right? So I guess for you, you're saying that naturally you've always been willing to look, right? And the only time you're not willing to look is when you're tired, or when you're just like when you need to take a break. Um, but otherwise, it feels as though it's something that almost anyone can do. You can. It's almost like a mindfulness exercise, right? You can like spend a few minutes every day doing literally nothing and some non-agenda thinking, just by looking. Like there's this lamp in front of me right now, and I'm just like, I've never really noticed it actually until this very minute, and now I'm actually noticing it, and I'm noticing that like it seems to have some sort of oxidized, rusted paint on the that's on the cover, and I wonder like what's the source of that paint, where was it produced. This material seems interesting. It's new, but it seems to also like be rusting quickly. Is that anything to do with the conditions here? So, anyways, there's almost like a rabbit hole in everything, right? And
Yeah.
whether it's offline or online.
Yeah, and I think that's something I really like about internet, is that it's given more exposure to niche, like
Yeah.
and like every day I come across these like really weird things, and I love it, so the other day I came across a Substack on canned fish. Okay, so it's, and the guy writes really, really well, so it's like really funny to read, and so he reviews all the canned fish. And I like it. I like people that have like this like very narrow, deep obsession, and that go deep on something. And I think that when you research such subject, and that comes from my media research background, is that since I'm kind of generalist and I'm interested in everything, is like the first thing is, when I sense something, when I feel there's a topic, I'm going to go and look for that obsessed person that knows more than I do, because that person is obsessed by that subject. So I'm going to go and look for that source. And that's like, my main goal, because once you find the source, you don't have to search everywhere. You're not, like overwhelmed by, all information and all everything. And so now for each topic I research, I find that source or that one person I feel is really obsessed and good about the subject. And then I follow that person.
Brilliant. So I want to tug on this thread of internet a little bit more. So just before we started recording, we were chatting about like lockdowns, the pandemic, right? I am curious, how has your process of getting inspired changed post this horrible virus and post-pandemic world that we're living in, if it has at all? Because I sense that clearly you spend a lot of time like online and very consciously online as well. You're not like maybe vegetating like the rest of us, but you're like you're digging and you're actively sort of carving out rabbit holes for yourself. But yeah, how has it changed? I appreciate. I think you're out of lockdown now, but especially when you found yourself like just at your home in France and perhaps nowhere to go. Yeah, how did things change for you?
Well, there's this I read somewhere, and I found that actually pretty funny and actually pretty true. Is someone wrote something that said, your second life on Twitter starts when you realize that the magic happens in DMs and
Yeah,
direct messages. And I think that has been a shift. Is that I made a lot of like internet friends during pandemic across the world, like like you, Mir is an example as well. And what is interesting is that I have maybe 15 people I talk to, by direct messages, like people that really inspire me and that I find really smart, really considerate people, because values is something that's
yeah.
very important for me. So I mean, if someone is smart but doesn't have the right mindset, I'm not interested. So I've probably made some bonds with around 15 people, and now I have, I think, maybe 4 or 5 of them, which are like these kind of like secret rabbit holes, uh, which are like private, and which really really matter to me a lot. And I think of one person in particular that is someone that is very very thoughtful and smart and considerate. And so I think we exchange like every other day or so. And then it's funny because he'll send me something, almost an enigmatic message, and then I'm like, okay, so that's something I need to dig in. And so I do the same, and it's actually pretty funny. And I realized that before I would pay a lot of attention to like what I was reading, but I was missing something in my process, which was people. So
Right.
if if I wanted like to like like deconstruct the process, I'd say that I write to kind of like structure my thoughts and to make it clear for myself. Then I say I would walk or exercise, or just let it sit to process. But I was missing that third part, which is talk with people to reflect on it. And that's something I realized with the pandemic, is that I think that talking with other people or reflecting on subjects with other people is really really important. And I think that has been a game changer. And I don't know if you've noticed, but a lot of my articles now more and more are being co-written, and I
Yep.
really like it because it's hard to write an article with someone else.
Yep.
And because it's each has their opinions. And so I think my first article was really really hard because we had two different point of views, or even on the writing or in everything. And now I'm pretty comfortable writing with other people because I like the way they bring a different flow, you know, a different perspective that maybe I wouldn't have considered. And I think that's also a way to expand, your inspiration, because basically it's like you're interchanging like inspiration throughout the whole process of writing. And yeah, so people.
That's that's actually a really inspired answer. And I love asking this question to a bunch of people. And I just, as you were chatting, I just noticed a pattern in almost everyone's answer. right? Firstly, no one has said that my process is exactly the same. That's one thing. Everyone's process has changed. And in most cases, I find people feel that their process is sort of less meaningful than it was before. And it's because the thing that they're missing is, let's say, like nature, right? Or in-person conversation. So people, that people have said that they're missing people, but in a physical context. What I love about your answer is that, you felt that you were missing people in the process, and you use the internet to find those right people, as opposed to like, meeting a few people in your city over a cup of coffee. Yeah, that's brilliant. That's really got me thinking a lot, actually. Amazing. So I want to switch gears a little bit and try something quite experimental, a little crazy and wild, which I'm sure you'll enjoy. So just before the call, I actually went on our new product, Inspo, which is a search engine for inspiration, and searched for one of your favorite topics, right? Which you've already kind of like dropped into this conversation a few times, and that is weirdness, right? And I spent like 20 minutes just like enjoying all of this random inspiration from lots and lots of different internet sources about weirdness. And I saved like 3 pieces that I thought were like pretty, got me thinking. And I was really curious to run them past you. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to one by one share them with you. And I'd love it if you can just like, yeah, respond to them, share any top of mind idea, question, we can have a conversation. It can be totally nonsensical and we can just jam. Sounds good?
Perfect.
Okay, so the first is a word association with weirdness that Inspo picked up by analyzing over 60,000 collaborative poems written by Asian millennials on the Haiku Jam social writing app, right? And the word is future. So what comes to mind when you think of weirdness plus future?
Metaverse. I think the future is going to be weird because technology is accelerating at a like unprecedented pace, and we're starting to see things like synthetic media, with
Yeah.
faking people, their faces and everything, like Photoshop on steroids. And I think really the word is going to get weird, and we're going to live in this extended reality. So yeah, weird, like future. I think it both exactly. And I think even Elon Musk had this YouTube video not so long ago, and he said, get ready, the future is going to be weird. So yeah, I think so. That's why I wrote the piece. So completely agree.
So it was interesting because I read some of the, just a tiny handful of some of the poems that expressed that association. So there were a number that related to like technology, and a few that actually used the word metaverse as well, which was quite cool. There were also seemed to be a significant number which were about like, kind of expressed a lot of nostalgia. And, when you're in school, there was always that weird kid. So maybe in your school, that was you said. And there were a number of these like beautiful thoughts, which were about like, like in school, someone is weird, but then they go and like change the world and have an impact on the future afterwards. And that, I think also that is quite connected to the way that we're thinking about the metaverse today. Like a lot of people, I find that, especially in technology and building for social, they're building oftentimes from a space of like lack, right? Not from a space of abundance, right? It's because they feel like a lack of belonging, right? In these current online environments, and they have to, we all want to belong in one way, shape or form. So they will go and build belonging themselves. So clearly like they can't find it anywhere else. So that's really cool.
There was this article that was really interesting that said that the weirdos would actually win in the future because algorithms can't classify what they don't understand, what is not rational, what is not, and so yeah, I like that.
Brilliant. Okay, so the next piece of inspiration, this is actually a question that was written by GPT-3 and a few creative associations from Haiku Jam. So the question is, how would the world look if everyone, like 7.8 billion people became 1% more weird?
It would be beautiful. I think, weird people have ways of seeing things and doing things in a way that brings joy, because often weird people are, looking for a deep meaning in their life, and pursuing, their weirdness, because they're looking for something bigger. So yeah, I think the place would be a better place, more beautiful.
And that is a beautiful answer. Thank you. So, lastly, and this is somewhat connected to the previous two, this is just a thought starter, and I'd be curious to get your thoughts on it. Again, this was written by GPT-3 and a bunch of associations from Haiku Jam. So, society is accepting of uniqueness, but is afraid of weirdness. Debate, discuss.
It's true. It's true, because again, I think it comes back to that quote, is that, something that is weird, it's not common. It's difficult to
Yep.
classify, and what is difficult to understand, classify, often gets people scared. I remember, I had a in my one of my first jobs, I had one of my boss was someone that was cyclo I don't know how you say it in English, but like changing moods. Okay. And that was it terrified me at that time. He was brilliant, but it terrified me because I'd never know how, in what mood he would be. But then if he was in a good mood, it's like he would do like some amazing stuff. So yeah, I think it frightens people. So um I think it's also linked to the fact that you have to try and understand people. And I think the older I grow, the more I'm like interested and fascinating about psychology. And I think, psychology should be learned, at school,
Yeah.
and people like understanding people, knowing how to talk to like different types of profiles according to your profile, that should be taught when you're a kid.
Yeah, that's another lovely thought. I feel like the operative word in all of that is understanding, right? And it's actually really, when it's convenient for us, oftentimes we understand, right? But oftentimes when it's just too outside of us, outside of our comfort zone, then acceptance and understanding become really, really difficult because, as you said, it's actually it's difficult to control. It's completely wild, unhinged, and that at some level frightens us. So there's like, and it's a spectrum, right? Like, in certain ways, it may just be like whenever there's some shift in industries. For instance, in our industry today, like creative thinking, creator tools. There's a lot of people in the world of advertising who are really afraid of this word AI, right? They're actually like sort of existential dread because they don't understand it and they can't really see the consequences of it. And there's then a lot of people who immediately think that, okay, this will displace all of us. But actually, once you dive deep into it a little bit, you realize that it's always a little bit more complex than that, right? It's never really black or white. It's always like something in the middle. And so much of it comes down to something that you said earlier, values and ethics as well, right? Like ultimately, technology is really, it's ultimately what you do with it, how you harness it, right? So if we want to design in a world where people are automated away, then I'm sure we can achieve that. But if we make a conscious choice that we want to design in a world that enriches creative thinking and augments people, not automates them, then we'll build in that direction, right? So it's never as if like, it's one of those things. I feel like we have very little control, but we do have agency over what we choose to do and how we choose to pursue things.
Oh, completely agree with you.
Lovely. So you've already mentioned a few people who've, like inspire you on Twitter and these internet friends, many of whom I'm sure you like never actually met in real life, right? And I found that oftentimes, like when someone inspires us, we just never really let them know, or we never show that gratitude just because like we're either unconscious or busy. And I feel like this is just such a shame because that acknowledgement could make them smile, could make their day, and also just encourage them to keep doing what they're doing and just being weird, right? Because it feels as though like wow, I'm reminded random quote from Ratatouille at the end of the scene, that famous speech where he talks about like the world is unkind to new talent, right? And I feel like yeah, the world is really unkind to weirdness, and you do need that tribe of people who are just like supporting you in that in your journey of curiosity. So just as a final question and request, if there's anyone who's inspired you recently, um, perhaps you'd like to give them a shout out.
Well, I won't give you any names
Sure.
because it's like I kind of like cherish those private conversations. But
Yeah.
what I will tell you is that there is a pattern. Like I'm inspired by extreme people. And I think that I'm inspired by extreme people because often extreme people have extreme outcomes. And when you think about it, like athletes, for example, or chefs,
Yep.
I love looking into people that have a deep obsession into a subject. And like I don't know if you've seen recently, there was this documentary that came on Netflix. It was called My Octopus Teacher. Okay.
Yeah, I've not watched it, but I spotted it.
And so this idea of this guy that follows an octopus for a year. I mean, obviously it does sound weird, I
Yeah.
mean, I won't say it is, but it's fascinating because
Yeah.
like this deep obsession and understanding he has is amazing. And so I like that type of people that are deeply obsessed with maybe one thing or different things. And um, this is a little trick, but there's something I really like is I often use a tool that allows me to search Twitter bios. Okay, and I will look for bios that have the words obsessed with.
Oh,
That's
interesting.
an amazing rabbit hole. And so when someone puts like deeply curious about or obsessed with really works well. And then that's like it's the start of a beautiful rabbit hole. So when you find a profile, then you can be it can be on anything. So I mean, lately I read something on microfluids, was fascinating. So yeah, that's a good trick, spotting those people. So, and when you think about like a lot of people that changed the world, like whether it's Einstein or people right now like Musk or Zuckerberg, or that they're all like obsessive, or at least extreme people with extreme outcomes. And probably I'll end on this subject. So I talked about towels. I think now that the logic follow up on this would be perfumes. I love
Right.
perfumers, okay, noses. So I'm very obsessed with scent. This is something that I find fascinating. And when I go somewhere, it's like basically smell spaces and people, and it's really important for me. And I noticed something that I'm very into, like niche perfume. And so obviously, as I said, I'm not just going to buy the perfume and look at the ingredients. I'm going to go and look at the nose. So the person that did that perfume. And I noticed that, so there's this person that's called Yann Vasnier, and I noticed that basically when I think we have the same kind of like taste or something. And whenever he, launches a perfume today, I could buy it without even testing it, you know? And so, yeah, I find that interesting. And I think we've got the same, smell or passion or obsession, and so I think it's fascinating.
That is amazing. There's a beautiful word in Japanese, I think, for deep obsession, and that is otaku.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And yeah, I think when I was much, may have been during university, I watched some Seth Godin talk or read one of his books. And I think it was in the first chapter, he just talked about, like find people who have an otaku, which is a deep obsession. And these are the people who, like, if there's a new kind of ramen noodle being launched, they're queuing up at midnight, right, at a supermarket because they're like, we've got to try like that latest ramen because it was made with this special kind of wheat from this, forgotten corner of Japan. So he's like, I think his general message in the context of marketing was that like find your obsession, right? Don't generalize. Don't like sort of just behave like a lowest common denominator. actually look for. So I love how you said it. Extreme people have extreme outcomes, and it's a lot more like I think effortless than people realize. So you don't need to sort of try and become extreme. If you just find what it is that really makes you curious, that extremism will naturally like just come right in that pursuit. You just almost like yeah, get out of your own way and go down that rabbit hole. Final thoughts from what you've said. I couldn't help but notice that like your process and your life seems to be so revolved around like these very intelligent and inspirational leading indicators, right? Like you're not necessarily uh, looking for the answer, but as soon as you said, if you find someone like who's you look for an expert and then you work your way to the source. And I find that again, that's just really interesting, and I feel like you're almost like leveraging the internet in the way that it was meant to be leveraged, right? Which is not to consume absolutely everything that yourself, because there are only 24 hours a day, and you, as you said, you need to sleep. But just by looking for those indicators and then understanding which thread to pull on and investing in which rabbit hole I'm going down, you almost like get right to the source, which is a human, right? Not a machine, and connecting with that person directly. So I think that's beautiful.
I think I'd end in this. It's actually from talking from you, made me like kind of reflect. It's like I'm not looking for the inspiration or a particular inspiration. I'm looking for inspiration opportunities, you know,
Yeah.
and whatever they are, wherever they come from, how weird or unexpected they may be. I'm just open for those. I call them insight rush.
And that is a beautiful place to end. That is amazing. Thank you so much, Marie. This was a lot of fun. I can't wait to put this out.
Thank you to you, Drew. It was great at being here. So thank you.
Thank you so much. And you've mentioned a bunch of really interesting people and resources and tools, and I think we'll just pop them in the show notes, and I'll get them from you later. So thanks again. Thanks for taking out the time.
Bye bye.
Bye.